this is a big book. It's a work of history, it's a work of interpretation, it's a work of argument. A work of argument, that didn't sound very good, but it's an argument. And so I want you, fortunately it's arranged in chronological order, which is extremely helpful for an interviewer. So I hope to proceed in chronological order, but before I do, before you take us back into the mists of prehistory, why don't you give us a frame for the book? What is this book about? What inspired you to write it? And what is the thrust of the book?
I guess it has two major aims. There are two questions I try to address in the course of what is basically a narrative. One is, what are the prospects for harmony among the Abrahamic religions in the modern world? And the other is, what are the prospects for religion broadly reconciling itself with science? And although both of those are questions about the contemporary world, I actually address them largely by reference to the ancient world. So I'll just say a little something about that, just a bare bones description of what I try to do, and then I hope that I can put some flesh on the bones as our conversation proceeds. As for the question of whether the Abrahamic religions can get along with one another, that's largely a question, I think, of what brings out the best in religion, what brings out the tolerance in religion, as opposed to what brings out the belligerence in a religion. And I address that by looking at the ancient world, at the scriptures themselves, and asking, what brought out the best and worst in religion then? I mean, in all of the Abrahamic scriptures, there's a certain moodiness in God. Sometimes God seems nice, sometimes not so nice. So in the Quran, sometimes God is speaking through Muhammad, advising Muslims to approach unbelievers by saying, you've got your religion, we've got ours, can't we get along? Sometimes God is saying, kill the unbelievers. In the Bible, sometimes God is telling the Israelites to annihilate neighbors that worship foreign gods. And sometimes the Israelites are approaching neighbors who worship a foreign god and not only suggesting peaceful coexistence, but even invoking this foreign god to validate the coexistence. So they say, you've got your god Chemosh, we've got our god Yahweh, your God gave you your land, our God gave us our land, can't we get along? So what I was interested in is what accounts for these moods, or to put the question in concrete terms, what circumstances on the ground at the time these scriptures came into being inclined the authors of Scripture to interpret God's will as tolerant on the one hand or belligerent on the other. So what circumstances brought out the best and worst in religion in ancient times, the idea being that maybe that tells us something about what would bring out the best and worst today. And I won't get into that much right now, except to say that I do put a lot of emphasis on the circumstances. So I don't think any religion has an eternal, unchanging character. I don't think the question, say, is Islam a religion of peace, even makes sense. I think all religions have shown they're capable of being a religion of peace and a religion of war, and the question is, how do you account for the shifts? So when I look at kind of the religious conflicts today, I think fundamentally they're not about religion. My bias is to see them as grounded in kind of facts on the ground, political, economic facts. That's not to say religion doesn't matter. It's not to say Scripture doesn't matter. I mean, it is to say that I think after 9/11, when a lot of people bought the Quran to try to read it and figure out what had happened, I don't think that's irrelevant. I think they would have been better off reading books about recent world history to understand why what had happened had happened.